The US is ordering the first nuclear test since 1982. Donald Trump says he has the authority to send military forces into US cities. He's going to strike military targets in Venezuela. And of course, there is Russia and Ukraine. So much to talk about with Ben Hodges, a retired three-star general. Ben, good to see you.
Always appreciate the privilege.
Ben, how serious is Donald Trump's announcement regarding ordering the first US nuclear tests since 1982?
Well, I would certainly take it serious. I mean, this is not a casual comment, but it does seem like I don't know what they're really thinking in terms of new policies. I mean, t nuclear testing is that's a pretty significant thing. It obviously the other countries would then feel obligated to or free to do their own testing, which is not necessarily good. At the same time, I imagine that this is in response. It feels like it was in response to President Putin's announcement about their nuclear powered system. And I don't know if this was interpreted by the US as a testing of a nuclear weapon, but the Russians were quick to say, oh, no, we didn't test a warhead, we tested the delivery system. Nonetheless, the president seems to have strong support, at least from most of the Republicans in the Congress, that, yeah, this is in response to Putin's waving around his own new missile.
Is this the right thing to do?
I would like to know more context about what is the thinking here. I mean, first of all, testing is really expensive. Um, and it's not like next week you're going to do a test. I mean, this is going to take a lot of time. Um, so it just seems out of step with all the other stuff they're doing. I'm not against ever being real strong and pushing back against Russian threats. Russia constantly threatens to use nuclear weapons. They brag about what they have all the time, which is irresponsible for a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And I always thought that the Biden administration should have come out and told the Russians, hey, if you keep threatening to use nuclear weapons, every time you threaten to do it, we're going to send another boatload of ammunition and missiles to Ukraine. So knock it off. And by the way, we have thousands of nuclear weapons too. So I'm not against the president making that clear to the Russians, but the actual testing, I mean, that has to be part of a broader strategy, and I just haven't, at least I have not seen that yet.
What implications do you think this will have for global security if now the US also starts testing?
Well, it potentially opens up Pandora's box for China to say, well, if the US is testing, then we need to start testing again also, because the Chinese have, I think, around 600 nuclear warheads probably, and they will logically be concerned about the readiness of their own nuclear weapons if they see that the U.S. is looking to test or modernize or whatever. But I think most countries will probably not overreact to this. I mean, I think with President Trump, people are learning to say, wait and see, is he really going to do something, or is this just him talking? Or I mean, this was on Truth Social, I think is how it's an unusual way for the president of the United States to announce such a significant potential new policy. So I think people are going to wait and see.
I would like to stick a little bit with this announcement. The Trump administration just announced that they're also going to target military targets within Venezuela, or kind of attack military targets within Venezuela. What do you make of that? What implications will that have?
I wish that the administration would do what they should do, which is to brief the Congress on what threats, what's this about? They talk about drugs, but fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela; it comes from Mexico. So it's not clear to me that this is all part of a really good strategy to eliminate drugs coming to America, or it has the feeling of more about regime change in Venezuela Um, but because the Congress has not been able to have the oversight of what's going on, and various other things going on in the Department of Defense restricting, I mean, there's no transparency. That's the best way to say it. There's no transparency. And so it feels like the administration is doing things that to be prepared for some kind of military conflict in Venezuela, and nobody knows why. I mean, what's going on? Now, it could be that they're trying to put so much pressure on the Maduro regime that it would collapse from within. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm not an expert on this region, but Maduro seems to have done a lot of things to make sure that he's not going to be overthrown from within. So I don't know, but I guess I would just summarize by saying that because there's no transparency in the administration about what they're doing, they don't explain why they're able to target these, why they're targeting these so-called Venezuelan drug boats, and why they would need to hit targets inside Venezuela um, without the congressional oversight. I'm uneasy about it.
And that's probably also true for the aircraft carrier Gerald F. Ford, which they're sending down there, right?
Two or three things about the Ford. It is our newest, biggest, most modern aircraft carrier. It's an incredible capability. Um, I think something, once the Ford arrives, we'll have almost 10% of the entire U.S. Navy in the Caribbean. I mean, not only is that a lot of combat power, that's a lot of, that's very expensive. So this is not something that you would do just for a demonstration, I don't think. And also, moving the Ford out of the Mediterranean, we don't have an aircraft carrier right now that's able to reach into Middle East or in Europe. So, yeah, now the administration, of course, can always set the priorities, but I would imagine that the Navy planning experts would be thinking about how do you mitigate, how do you cover that. The commander of U.S. European Command will be concerned about that carrier departing. But that this is the nature of things that the every administration, the Department of Defense is always having to balance risk, opportunity, and resources because you never have enough resources to cover everything. But that's an awful lot of combat power that's being concentrated. Plus, we've had the demonstrations with the bombers and other aircraft flying over Venezuela.
What implications does this have for Europe and Ukraine?
Well, I think this is further evidence, even though the new national security strategy has not been released or it's about to be released, I think this reinforces the notion that the priority for the administration is going to be the Western Hemisphere, not just homeland defense, but the whole hemisphere. Probably Indo-Pacific as the second priority, and then Europe as the third priority. So usually, you know, if you want to know where the priorities are, you go where the people are, the resources, and the money. And so if you're moving things from here to there, obviously that's the priority. So the implications will be what the Trump administration has talked about from the campaign and then all this year is an expectation that Europe is going to have to fill the gaps. And you combine this with the announcement just earlier this week about um, a, a reduction of U.S. forces that are in Romania. The brigade that's there now will not be replaced when their rotation comes to an end. So that's a reduction of several hundred troops. But it's not just the numbers, it's the optics of we're not going to replace when this unit leaves, we're not going to replace it. And that's happening at a time that there was a huge war on the European continent happening, and the Russians are also conducting gray zone operations against NATO countries, including Romania. Um, and to have the U.S. announce that they're reducing their presence while that's going on, I think that's a bad signal. The Russians invaded Ukraine in 2014 after the last two American heavy brigades were withdrawn and after the aviation brigade, which had all the attack battalions, was inactivated. So I think the Russians pay attention to our force posture, obviously.
There are voices within Europe which say they're really afraid that Vladimir Putin is planning something on other countries, other European countries than Ukraine. Do you share these concerns?
I do. The risk goes up if Ukraine fails, if we allow Ukraine to fail, or if the Russians perceive that European nations are not willing to come to the assistance of, let's say, Latvia or Estonia or Lithuania. Now, I don't know that that would be the case, but there's no doubt that President Putin's objective has always been to drive a wedge between the US and Europe and to cause the breakup of NATO. And a way to do that would be to launch an attack, a limited attack against, say, Daugavpils in Latvia or in the Suwalki corridor area of Lithuania and Poland, and then stop and say, do you really want to have a nuclear war over this little piece of territory? And if NATO says, no, we don't, well, then the whole credibility of Article 5 would be seriously questioned. So even though Russia has not been able to defeat Ukraine after 11 years with every advantage, they still only occupied 20% of Ukraine and over 1 million casualties. Um, I think the Russians are going to keep doing what they're doing because they feel confident that we will quit. And so this is where we are. And again, that's why I think it's a bad time for the U.S. to be announcing drawdown of its presence.
How worried should Germans be that Russia is attacking Germany?
Well, worried is not the word I would use. They should take it serious, and the leadership in Germany should talk to German citizens as if they were adults and say, look, we don't like it. Russia clearly is at war with us, even if we wish it were not so. And we need to do everything necessary to protect our sovereignty, German sovereignty, German airspace, German people. And when you have drones shutting down the Munich airport 3 days in the space of a couple of weeks, that is not only dangerous, it's also an enormous economic impact. And so the sabotage that happens in the Baltic Sea, these illegal shadow fleet vessels that sail past Germany out through the Danish Straits every day carrying Russian oil, we're not doing anything about it. The Russians should be worried about provoking Germany instead of Germany and other countries being terrified about what Russia might do. So this is the time for more self-confidence by very strong, wealthy, technologically advanced European countries. I mean, even if the U.S. is not a part of this, if you add together the populations, the prosperity, the technological advantages, the industries of all of the EU countries, plus UK, plus Norway, and maybe even plus Canada, it dwarfs Russia. I mean, it's not even close. And yet there's a lack of self-confidence about people are worried that what Russia might do, and it should be the other way around.
And I would like to go back to the US for a minute. Donald Trump also says that he has the authority to deploy, I quote him here, to deploy US military forces into American cities. What does that mean?
His authority would come from the invocation of the Insurrection Act. So technically, he would have that authority. But the Insurrection Act has pretty high standards of these things have to be happening in order to do that. None of that's happening. So what it looks like is that the administration is trying to create the scenario to justify the Insurrection Act. And I mean, they've been very provocative using National Guard troops and ICE and other agencies, grabbing people in some cities and doing things in a very provocative way, almost, I don't know this, I can't prove it, but it looks like, being done in a way in hopes that there would be a a more violent reaction, something that looked like the Black Lives Matter of several years ago. And then they would say, see, now we have to send in the army to protect American citizens and property. And then, of course, the real fear is that this would extend up to the midterm elections. And so I think these are all connected. The president, yes, does have the authority if the Insurrection Act is invoked. And this is where this is going to be a test of moral courage for many Republican members of Congress and governors of red states that would be tasked to send troops. And it's also going to be a test of the military leadership, whose oath is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Are they being told to do something that would be a violation of the Constitution? Um, this is going to be a very challenging time in the coming months, and with the government still shut down, I mean, we're not in a good place with all the normal systems functioning like they should.
You just mentioned the midterms. I mean, people here are really concerned that they, might not be taking place in the way they should be taking place, and that the military could play a role in that.
Well, I guarantee you, nobody that's in the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy or U.S. Air Force or Marine Corps, regular soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines, wants to get involved and do anything against their fellow citizens. That's not who we are, who they are. Um, and so um, I think that day at Quantico when the president and the Secretary of Defense talked to all the generals and admirals and they talked about the president mentioned using American cities as training areas. I am sure that at least 95% of the people in that room were like, what? I mean, just the idea is so contrary to everything we've ever learned and understood and believed. So, no, this is going to be a test for members of the Senate and House Armed Services Committee that have oversight responsibility and the senior leadership, especially on the Republican side. It's going to be a test of our judicial system. I mean, is the Supreme Court just going to sit by and allow this to happen? Um, and then for the military leadership, this is going to be a real test of how do you fulfill your constitutional responsibility of obeying lawful orders from the commander in chief, but not doing something that would be illegal or a violation of the Constitution.
But Pete Hegseth, the secretary of the newly renamed Department of War, said, and I also quote him here, he urged military leaders who oppose the new direction to do the honorable thing and resign. So he's very outspoken about that.
Yeah, sure he is. And also, it's still the Department of Defense until the Congress changes the law. So he can call it whatever he would like, but it's the Department of Defense. Um, well, again, this is what I mean by the test. The idea that somehow loyalty to the administration is the priority versus to the Constitution. Now, of course, it's always been the case that if a senior officer can't support a policy in good conscience because he or she believes it's a terrible policy, it's wrong, then they should resign. If it's illegal, that's a different story. If it's illegal, then you should be pushing back saying, Mr. Secretary, we can't do that. You can't shoot Americans, citizens. You can't use military force against in law enforcement role. That's against the law. And that should be the debate. Now, of course, what we're seeing is that the Secretary of Defense has been pushing out people that have not embraced all that he wants to do. Well, we just saw that the announcement by the commander of U.S. Southern Command, the admiral, is stepping down after 1 year. General McGee from the Joint Staff, who's one of the best soldiers I've ever known in my life, is being forced out. And Now, again, to be fair, every general admiral serves at the pleasure of the president. That's what we say. You know, if it's not illegal, if it's just bad policy or stupid policy, you still have to do it to the best of your ability or resign. Um, so I think there's a lot of this kind of tension there in the Pentagon. But of course, we don't have as much visibility there as we used to either.
Ben Hodges, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Always a pleasure.